Man to Man, an authentic conversation with Cedric Edison and Ron Servan. The topic today, vulnerability. So, what does vulnerability mean to me today? To me, vulnerability means uh, the allowing of yourself to show all of you, not just parts of you that you want others to view or to acknowledge or to feel good about. It's showing those dark sides of us that feel very uncomfortable. They feel scary. They feel fleeting, like you need to run from those thoughts. Um, it feels very safe and sometimes comfortable being small and not allowing myself or seeing others to allow themselves to be um, vulnerable, staying small in the moment. Um, and just being willing to show all of my emotions, not feeling like I need to protect certain feelings that might be judged by others. As a man, crying or showing sadness or emotions of love even sometimes can be looked at as being weak or not being a man or not being strong. Many men unfortunately look at that as being a sign of weakness. And I know in my heart that my willingness to show all sides of who I am without judgment from myself and not worrying about how others might view or experience that allows me to be a complete man, to allows myself to feel my heart. It allows me to understand the importance of um, the feelings that I can share with others, to have that deeper connection with myself, my friends, my wife, my son, just having that overall peace of mind that I'm sharing all of me, not just those parts of me that I feel very comfortable and strong about. So today, I feel like I'm definitely a much more vulnerable man in respects to allowing that to be a part of my life. Um, and I respect that in other men that are able to have that same experience. And I would encourage people that may listen to this, especially men, to allow themselves to get in touch with their feelings and to allow themselves to share all of themselves.
Hmm, I like that. So that brings up a question to me. I'm just kind of interested to know what are some steps you took to allow yourself to be more vulnerable today than yesterday?
Um, just putting my thoughts live out there to the world, to experience part of me that I kept as a kind of a barrier to not be heard or not to be because I've dealt with at times a sense of not being accepted. So if I stay small and I don't put myself out there, I'm more accepted than if I put myself out there in situations that maybe people might judge. But that's my thought. That's not. I'm assuming others feel that same way. So stepping out, sharing my feelings, especially on live video, which has been very powerful for me, has definitely pushed me forward.
Okay, cool, cool. So, what does vulnerability mean to you today? For me, I would have to say that it's being able to, or being vulnerable, especially as a man, for me, would be to, uh, somewhat like you said, be able to show all of me, the good, the bad, the ugly, um, which is what causes a lot of the reasons why we don't want to be vulnerable. Um, But interesting thing, like man, this is so crazy how it's a double-edged sword. Just right before we had the call, you know, me and my child's mom we at the store. We were in this time crunch. I'm like, I got the call at 8:30, and you know, I kind of took it the wrong. I reacted the wrong way, but it was so hard for me to have to just walk in the kitchen and explain where I was coming from and explain that that was the hard part. So that kind of equates to vulnerability to me today, to be able to openly express everything, all of you, as well as be able to accept any judgment that'll come from whatever you present to the world.
Hmm. Awesome. So when you now connect with others in your life, and especially another man that may have reservations about sharing parts of them, and then they show that vulnerable side to you, how does that make you feel?
Oh wow. Um, Not alone. um, Not alone, and if I'm able to influence in a way, um, I mean, it makes me feel good to be able to see another man embrace all of that, you know, because I know once you are able to embrace it, it somewhat turns you into a better person. So that just makes me feel good about all of humanity in a small, weird way.
Hmm. Okay. So next question, what did vulnerability look like as you were growing up? So if I was to close my eyes and move myself back in time to as a small child, um, my dad was one that came from a upbringing of you work hard and you provide good things and monetary things in your life. You provide them the experience of going places in their to locations, but not so much about sitting down and sharing in what's going on in each other's lives. The struggles that he may have been having, how he viewed different things as I moved through my life as a child. Um, so I remember times being able to, I remember times with my father, um, sitting in a chair watching TV at night with him, and being with him, but not feeling connected to him. So I never felt until later in life that emotional connection with him and his willingness to be vulnerable with me at a much later stage of his life, actually when he was closer to his death, um, which I'm glad I was able to experience that part of him, because I felt even more as like I was his father than he was my father. So at that point of his life, he was allowing me to see a side of him that I don't think he ever shared much in his life. Whether when he was young or as a father or as an older adult. Um, so when I look back at my life, not a lot of vulnerability talked to me, but it was a pleasant experience to share that with my father at an age, I guess a later age than I was hoping, but to actually see that side of him and to connect with
Okay. You know, you bringing that up with your dad, and I know you have Anthony there. So, how are you um, going about showing him vulnerability, or how to be vulnerable?
that. It was usually more around arguments, and I guess that vulnerability came out in a different way to where I shared my feelings with him, more in a response to him and how he was being with me as in a negative light. So I think I showed him, I guess, a different version of vulnerability, my feelings around his struggles and my struggles with trying to you know be a loved son, and to be a son of a father that loves me for who I am. So I think more of my connection with him as far as vulnerability was more of an aggressive willingness to show my, instead of shutting down and being small, there was times where I reacted in a much more, I guess, from a state of fear or anger or sadness that could be perceived as fear, with him, not so much in areas of sadness, but more around just kind of that, I guess, fear, and sharing that with him in a vulnerable state.
Okay. All right. So what did vulnerability look like as a kid? For me, honestly, looking back, I would have to say that it really didn't look like much. It didn't exist. Vulnerability didn't exist. Single parent home, mom, 3 kids. I was the youngest of three, older brother, and we lived in. I mean, we lived in the hood, in the project. So we didn't know anything about that. It was the only thing we knew about men or being vulnerable was that it was a sign of weakness. And if you were vulnerable, that meant you were a hyena and not a lion. So you were going to get eaten. So you did not show any signs of weakness, no emotion. It did not exist, um, as far as it being taught. But, when I look back and reflect over it, it was honestly chaotic in the mind because you have these emotions and you have all this stuff going on and you don't know how to deal with it. And the only thing you're told is to keep it inside. So that was kind of chaotic, mentally, because, when you're a child, you don't know how to deal with it. And you just store it away in that compartment. Okay, this is something I'm just going to have to learn to deal with if I want to be a man. You're not weak. You don't be vulnerable. Um, that's that's a very vivid picture I can see when I look back and really think about it. And one, the thought of it was not there, and the thought of it was chaotic.
So back then, if you were to move back in that childhood experience, what was your outlet, or was that just all things that you kind of buried deep inside, and then now you're kind of coming more into the understanding of that part of you?
Oh, for me, I mean, it came out in quite a different ways, and it was kind of in stages. I talked a lot when I was, real young. I just talked about anything. I wanted anybody to just be talking so we can just talk. But as I got older, it kind of became anger and rage, and it stayed there for quite a while. Honestly, until here, past few years, honestly, even when I was in the military, it was rage because you didn't know how to let it out. I mean, you just keep it in, but it had to come out at some point. It's like a pot. You just keep putting steam, and eventually it's going to erupt. And for me, um, it was sadness, like talkative sadness. Then there was a bit of a depression there where I just kind of shut down, became a loner, goth kid. And then after that, it was just, I realized, oh, well, you can take it out on people and then it became like you become a butthole, asshole. You learn how to use your words and you get real shifty with your words. Um, so yeah, it came out in many different ways, that I'm still to this day dealing with.
Mhm. Okay. Um, how can you influence men to better understand vulnerability in their lives? For me, um, just to allow myself to show that side of me in situations with all men in my life, to allow them to feel that they can be themselves, and they're not going to be judged, and they're not going to be devalued, and they're not going to be anything other than loved, as a brother or as a friend or as a coworker, just to show that that's an opportunity that's always there. And their willingness to accept and acknowledge and move in the direction of that is kind of their journey. But I think giving them that space and knowing that's there for them, and allowing them to tap into that space when they feel it's the time for them to do that, and honoring that, not pushing them too hard to where they feel maybe the pressure of a past experience and being forced to do something versus it being their decision, and holding themselves accountable for that step that they take forward. I think for me, that's my best opportunity, is to make people in my life feel that sense of safeness and trust and willingness to accept, as you mentioned earlier, the good and the bad, and without judgment, because we all come from a place where we could, look back on mistakes that we made and what we should have done, but maybe that was a learning point in our life that we needed to go through.
I like that. I didn't even bring a question up for me. Okay, so how can I influence men to better understand vulnerability in their lives? Just the way I am, and how I am, would like to be with my coaching. And it's something I'm coming up with, is walk as I walk. And not meaning, that can come across the wrong way to most men, but it's coming from a place of leadership. Lead by example. I've always been a stickler by that. And that's, even coming up, I just look for strong models, and that's just kind of how we are. And I look for the person that's leading the right way. And continue to fall down on that double-edged sword, because we can have these conversations all day long and say what we want people to hear, but it's different once the audio is off and now life happens. You got to be willing to be like, you know what? Hey, this is a moment for me to be vulnerable. Let me go in here, swallow the man pride, and go and apologize, even though you might be doing it a whole bunch. But it's really just, for me, lead by example, and as well as continue to do these types of videos and have dialogue with anybody that wants to have it, because that's the best way. As a coach, it's not about information, it's about curated stuff. So I have to be mindful at all times, and that's leading by example.
No. So if you look into men in your life now, Cedric, what barriers or what willingness do you think others, now that you put these videos out there, because I've seen some of the posts of friends on your Facebook page that are, saying nice things. How do you see this part of who you're showing now? How do you see this influencing their lives?
I see it positively, is my main goal. But, looking at it, it's kind of interesting because of the, sometimes we place these prejudgments on people, and they're my friends, and I kind of know some of them from the past, and I'm like, thinking, they may not be that sensitive, or they may not see this, but then to see some of their responses, maybe it placed, I don't know if that's how they are now, or if it was something that jarred some of their memories, but I could see it going a long way, because I'm showing that, hey, this hardened individual, this hardened Marine, if I can do it and open up, by God, anybody in the world can. So.
Great. So our last bullet is, what barriers do I see in allowing men to be more vulnerable? I think the biggest barrier that I see men having in being vulnerable is judgment. I think their own personal judgment, and a lot of it learned from, their fathers and their fathers' fathers, and just kind of how we've been programmed through our life, and that unwillingness to break that cycle at times, because unfortunately, when things feel comfortable in our life, we'll continue that action that we do very well, whether it's good or bad. Um, so, for individuals, especially men, to break that chain or that, the macho, kind of disposition that many men, including myself at times, have been a part of. Um, that's a huge, I think, obstacle for men to, kind of be willing to see past that, and how their action could then influence another man to be more vulnerable. And then that man could allow and show and influence another man. So I think when you look at the big picture and your willingness to do that, knowing that you may be in a group of men that overall aren't willing to or able to tap into that side of themselves. But if one individual stands up, whether that's me or somebody else that I've influenced, that's how change happens. So I think if you have the mindset that you're going to change the world, that can be done over time, but it's also going to take others to commit to that same vision that you're creating for yourself, and stay the course, because you're going to have that. They're going to have moments in your life where it doesn't feel comfortable, because we all like to, whether we want to admit it or not, we all like that little bit of reciprocal energy back our direction. We give a lot. We should live a life of not having expectations to come back in a way that we've put out there. But we're humans. We all have certain needs that are basic needs that we need to be aware of. And there are times where that energy or that willingness to feel that kind of connection in reciprocal is important for us as humans. So, but through that process, you could get very easily discouraged by the lack of movement in that direction. But that's why we're here today. We're here to have a discussion about what individuals, you and I are, and our willingness to push ourselves to that next level. There may be an individual that takes this word and runs with it and creates change in one other individual's life. And if we can do that, then we're doing a good job in our life.
Oh man, I would agree. Any change in momentum is good. Well, in a positive momentum. Um, or do you see any barriers in the way for you?
No, I think my boldness has come at a later stage of my life, but I'm not one that feels that the best years aren't ahead of me. So I feel like there's my willingness, my desire, and now my ability to step out in front of my own self and to be a bold version of maybe the man that I thought I was, but am now becoming.
Okay. Okay. What barriers do I see in allowing men to be vulnerable, to be more vulnerable? Um, from where I sit, um, in my immediate environment and community, I would have to say one of the biggest barriers, being a young Black male, I honestly have to say is that there's honestly just not enough male presence um, to be able to teach that. Um, however, I do see where that can be eliminated, because there are a lot of young Black males in the community that could use role models. And so that, and plus society, as a man, I'm sure you've known, and you work for the city, so it's a lot of just blue collar guys. Weakness, vulnerability is not something we're taught. Um, so that need and the shift of the mindset change is the biggest barrier, and probably the only barrier that I can honestly see that needs to be addressed. And that's kind of where we come in, these conversations, and And it's just like an old, like I used to hear in church, but it can apply to anywhere. Each one teach one. Man, that apply, and golly, that really applies like for us, because as we take that journey down the path to learn ourselves and learn to be better, we have to teach one. And that's how we can overcome those barriers, I think.
So imagine yourself walking down the street in your hometown and bumping into one of these young men in your community that maybe doesn't have necessarily a direction in his life. He doesn't necessarily have a father that he looks to provide him guidance. You run into him at a corner, and he asks you, Cedric, how at this age that I'm at now, what would be my first step to allow myself to be more vulnerable and to be a more authentic man in my life?
I guess it would be a trivial piece of advice, but probably one I would have to give him is to, one, not worry about how you're going to become a better man. Because for so long that bothered me was the question, how do you become a man? And then all the other questions like, what do I need to do? And all of this other stuff. I would just tell them, look, man, don't even worry about how you're going to become a better man. And then I would have to ask him, what is his vision of a good man? And based on whatever his vision is, I would just start working with him, take him under my wing to systematically, start going toward taking action towards the steps he sees as being a good man. And if it was something, where I couldn't give advice because that's his depiction, but if it wasn't something that was for the betterment of himself, while at the same time becoming a person that's going to better mankind, then we would have to talk about whatever that would be. But as long as it's something he sees that's for everybody, then we would just go at it that way. At the end of the day, I'm a coach, and that's what I want to do is I got to help them. And not necessarily help them, but because it's hard not to put that advice on them, but just kind of get them to see that, hey, there's many different versions of you that you can become, and you get to choose which version you want to be, and why not choose the best one? And let's go for it.
Awesome. Well, great conversation this week, Cedric. I really enjoyed this topic, vulnerability, and definitely looking forward to next week and the conversation at hand. So have a great evening, and we'll chat next week.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to it.